a little bit about yourself to open up the story.
All right. My name is Amelia Boone, and God, this is the hardest question ever. It's like, I'm like, how do I introduce myself? No, my name is Amelia Boone. I'm a 4-time world champion obstacle racer, an ultra runner, and I'm also an attorney.
So those are all both very driven, highly, perfection-driven things. It makes perfect sense that that you'd be good at both of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I never really actually set out to be a professional athlete or an elite athlete. It was something that I fell into later in life. And so I think for me, I've juggled the athletics with, working as an attorney, and but it's been great. But I think that because I wasn't in athletics from a super early age, there were a lot of things that were new to me then that came at later on that I wasn't familiar with. So
when you were younger in high school, what sports did you participate in?
Yeah, so I played throughout high school. I mean, growing up, I was a very athletic kid, kind of jack of all trades. I was good at pretty much everything I touched. So soccer, softball, basketball, all of the team sports. And I was a good athlete. At some point, not at some point, but when I was a sophomore in high school, I developed an eating disorder. And because of that, I got very, very physically sick and actually had to step away from all of my sports. And never really, so I quit a bunch of sports. I didn't really play. I couldn't perform like I used to. And so my athletic career at a young age was cut short at that time.
So based upon what seems like the talent that's been revealed later, you probably would have gone on to a D1 sport, either soccer or some sport. You probably would have been recruited or would have played, gone into the next level.
Yeah, I think I was on trajectory from an early age to play at the next level, to go there. And unfortunately, it just never materialized. I was too sick to be competing. It was taken away from sports. I wasn't allowed to play anymore.
So, Amelia, what do you think was looking back, maybe there wasn't the education that we have today, or at least more awareness, what was the root cause of the eating disorder you had at that early age?
It's interesting. I'm 38 years old right now, and I still cannot tell you why I developed an eating disorder. And it's so multifactorial, and it's different for every person. And I think I've just kind of, at this point, I've realized I don't need to know why. I just know that it happened, and learning how to navigate that, and also at that time not understanding how it would impact me for the rest of my life, I think is a very kind of bitter pill to swallow at this point.
As a woman, and these are all very difficult questions, and it's tough to talk about. Thank you again, but we have to. It's like talking about it really helps educate others, and like men like myself and others, to know we have to be comfortable talking about these topics for the change to take place. And luckily, I had two sisters that were both very athletic, and so I grew up sort of being comfortable enough to sort of talk about the next question, which is, when you went from a girl to a woman, how did that change your body, and how did it affect you in your athletics?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was actually a pretty, I would say, late bloomer. And I didn't really go through a lot of body changes. And actually, as I went through puberty, that was right around when my disorder developed. And there is this part of me that I think I was also scared of being a woman. And knowing that everything that came with it was very kind of messy, and, I didn't want to deal with it. And I realized if I starved myself, I wouldn't go through those changes. And I don't really know if that was in the forefront of my mind. It necessarily wasn't like, I am going to develop an eating disorder so I can avoid this. But it was kind of a unintended benefit that I enjoyed at the time, that I wasn't going through those changes. And therefore, like, I didn't have to deal with all of that messy stuff that I saw that other girls my age had to deal with.
So you were actually able to delay your cycle, and for how long did that take place?
Yeah, I mean, I did start my period when I was 14, but then my eating disorder started shortly after that. So I did not have a period for a good probably 6 or 7 years until I was in my early 20s. And no one really told me that it was a bad thing, I suppose. And I enjoyed it because I didn't have to deal with, everything that went along with it. But I don't think doctors weren't overly concerned with that fact. And also just you're a young and healthy and athletic girl, and that's normal. Nobody said, no, this isn't normal and this needs to change. At the same time, they also wanted to put me on birth control because that would force me to get my period. And at that time, it was in the late 90s, they assumed that would be enough, that would give me the benefits of building bone, that would give me everything that I needed. And we've come to learn that that's not the case.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I'm talking to a lot of science people, and even Dr. Stacy Sims.
Yeah, she's great.
She's in this show, and she's
perfect. Yeah,
she is so good, and Karabazi. I'm getting the experts all across to really indemnify this. But the thing that I learned about, without a period, without the estrogen in your blood, the bone density changes, and nobody is monitoring your bone density, but also the psychological. Keep talking.
Yeah.
We know how to turn that. We have a control.
Oh yeah, there you go.
The psychological good thing it happened while I was talking.
Right.
The psychological challenges of not having, you're a woman. There's not just body changes, and as Stacey Sims says, men get testosterone. They get bigger and stronger and more aggressive. Women, their hips get wider. Everything changes, and not understanding that a healthy cycle is critical for a healthy woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at this point, I had a DEXA scan done when I was, after I got out of the hospital. So I was hospitalized for my eating disorder when I was 16, and I spent 6 weeks in just a general ward, a general hospital bed. They didn't really have eating disorder treatment facilities at the time. They didn't know what to do with me. So it was kind of like psych ward or children's ward. And they did a DEXA scan, and it showed at the time basically the numbers that I had osteoporosis at 16 years old. And I think that at that time they talked about putting me on Fosamax and all of the bone building drugs that they put women on who are 70, 80 years old to not break their hips. And luckily we didn't go that route because we found out now the side effects, and you shouldn't be giving that to younger kids, but we didn't really know any better.
No, and one of the key in this film, she was a runner from Canada, ran at Richmond, was a distance runner.
Yeah.
She didn't have a menstrual cycle she had delayed it completely.
Yeah.
And she was trained for the 2008 Olympics and shattered her femur. And they said, not only are your running career is over, your career, you may not be able to walk again.
Right. Yeah.
And so that devastation, this was somebody whose whole identity was based around their experiences as a runner.
Yeah.
And it shattered her, so she had to find out what the next thing was for her. She went to New York, and she's now an influencer.
Oh, yeah.
Doing great, and an educator.
Yeah.
But she's still trying to get over the competitive side of things. And, she's got like a zero body fat. It's like there's a lot of things that are still not right.
Right. Well, and what's interesting is that you can perform well throughout an eating disorder for a very long period of time. Through the entire time, I've been on and off in recovery since I was 15, 16 years old. And throughout that entire time in college, when they were trying to yank me out of school, send me to a treatment facility, they couldn't. I was summa cum laude, 4.0 student, functioning extremely well. And then later on, when I started competing and I rose to the top of the ranks in obstacle racing and ultra running, I was doing well. I was winning world championships, and I could convince myself as long as I was winning, there wasn't a problem. And the funny thing about the body is such an amazing thing in that it will do everything it can to preserve itself. And it will for so long. And it did for me for so long until it couldn't anymore. And then it just was broken bone after broken bone after broken bone. And at this point, I was in my 30s already. And just to be hit with that and be like, oh, the body really does keep the score at this point.
I talked to a nutritionist a couple of months ago, and she said the women's body is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And it says without enough nutrition, it shuts down what it doesn't absolutely have to function.
Mm-hmm.
And a cycle, you don't have to, you need to breathe, you need to have water, you need all these things, and that's the first thing that goes.
Mm-hmm.
And the repercussions of that, to your point, nobody really understood how severe that was.
Right. Yeah. And people just assume that at some point you would get your cycle back and it would be totally normal. I'll be honest, I was deep in my eating disorder. I didn't have a period for, most of high school and college. And then in college, I ended up getting a hormonal IUD, which shuts down like the bleeding part. So you don't actually know if you're losing your cycle. So I haven't had a period probably since I was in my teens. And I'm now 38 years old. I don't know how much of that has been because of my eating disorder and how much of that is because of the IUD. And so it is something is a strange area as well. That's something also that women don't consider, that if you're using hormonal birth control, you may not be able to even tell that you're losing your cycle.
Now, obviously the clear effects of lack of estrogen
Mm-hmm.
is the bone break. Tell me about the injuries that you sustained.
Yeah, so I in 2016 I ended up with a stress fracture in my femur, and it kind of was really big. It like spiraled around the part of my femur. I didn't even know you could break your femur at this point. So I ended up with a stress fracture in my femur, and then I healed from that. And 3 weeks after I'd returned to running from healing from the femoral stress fracture, I ended up with a sacral stress fracture. So I was out from running for a year. And then I got back into training, spent about 6 months running, and ended up with completely displacing one of my metatarsals, broke that. And a few months after I healed from that, I ended up with a stress fracture in my heel, in my calcaneus, which I have now, and then I've broken that 3 times. So I have broken a lot of things, a lot of bones. I think in the past 5 years, I've had 7 stress fractures.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
But yet you're still competing at a high level. You're still out there.
Right.
You're still competing, right? You're still.
Well, it's interesting. The thing that broke, for many years after I went to residential treatment for my eating disorder after college. Literally, I graduated from college, got in a car, drove across country, and went straight to the facility where I was for the next 8 weeks. And then I went back, and then I kind of decided at that point, okay, this is a chapter behind me. I'm done with this. I no longer have an eating disorder. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to tell anybody. And I convinced myself that I was in a very good place in my recovery. And I think I was for a few years, but as I got more into athletics, as I started racing more, as I got better and better, as I reached the top of my sport, all of the little habits and things kind of came creeping back. And that was the point where I started to break bones. And so at the age of 35, this was 2018, I decided enough is enough. And that's when I took a leave of absence from work and decided to go back into a partial hospitalization treatment at Opal Food and Body. And mainly the reason was these broken bones are keeping me from doing what I love to do. The fact that I cannot adequately nourish myself is preventing me from doing the sport that I love. And it didn't matter what I weighed if I was too injured to even get to the start line at that time. And so I made a conscious decision to go back into treatment so I could race in a healthy manner and compete in a healthy manner. I have actually had 2 stress fractures still after I went back to treatment. And it's very frustrating because I told myself, I'm doing all the right things, I'm getting help. Why am I still breaking bones? And unfortunately, like the body doesn't forget that easily, that I've spent over 20 years of my life damaging myself. I'm not going to undo all of that in, a matter of 2 years. And so I think it's going to be a lifelong process for me.
Well, you're such a unique, special athlete. I mean, you've got so much talent, and it's blossomed. You've got a ton of sponsors. Are your sponsors in any way helping with some of the education, sort of the, helping with the psychology of it, the nutrition angles? Because a lot of the, I mean, you were kind of innocent to what was out there, the repercussions.
Right.
You didn't it's like, if you do this, you're going to create this problem.
Right.
And I don't know if people know that. I don't think they really understand. I know they don't.
Well, when I was much younger, nobody understood it. And now I think it's very much in the conversation. Everyone is promotes eating enough and making sure that you stay out of red S and everything that goes along with that. But unfortunately, we all say this, but there's still a problem. Like, we all intuitively know this. And I knew as an athlete that if I didn't eat enough, I was going to break bones. Yet the nature of the eating disorder is that it is hard to make yourself do that on your own, which is why you need a treatment team, which is why you need support, which is why you need sponsors that step in and say, hey, something has to change. I personally haven't had intervention from any of my sponsors, but every time when I reached out to them and said, hey, I need to take a leave of absence from racing, and I'm not going to race for a year because I'm going back into treatment and this is really hard for me, they were like, thank you, take care of yourself. And that is incredible. And that has been a big shift in how people are treating eating disorders now, is that really everyone doesn't want you to spiral into that. And there's a big focus on being a lifelong athlete. Unfortunately, there's still kind of a disconnect. We're seeing women and men all over the place just dealing with the repercussions of this. So
some of those repercussions, and I think women have been chronically underserved as far as physicians and understanding and dealing with some of the problems. Some of it's just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
People don't want to talk about cycles, and all. It's just like, we don't want to know about that.
Right.
And it's just the nature of things. But I think, has it also contributed? I mean, obviously, the eating disorder is a mental situation. It's not just physical; it's mental. Have you had any complications that led to even something beyond that, like depression or the need for Zoloft or any of the psychiatric? How is that?
Yeah, I mean, so I was actually diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder when I was 7 years old. So that predated my eating disorder. And actually, when I developed the eating disorder, they actually thought it was just another manifestation of my obsessive compulsive disorder. They thought, okay, well, now she's just afraid of food, which isn't exactly the case. It is something completely distinct. But it goes hand in hand. And I think there is this great question too, in the endurance community, is that are the traits that make somebody a good athlete also the traits that predispose them to an eating disorder? Or is it vice versa? Is it a chicken or the egg kind of situation here? Is that what comes first? Is running causing the eating disorder, or is the eating disorder just the traits that lead to that make it so you are more likely to want to be a runner or an endurance athlete? And I find that kind of fascinating. As far as medications, I have been on and off all different types of SSRIs throughout my life. And some have worked, some haven't. Some have made me feel awful. Some I've just stopped because I didn't like them. So I don't know. I think that we're also, as high-level athletes, you're afraid of, how the psychiatric medicines will also affect your performance. And that's just a big unknown that I don't think anybody's really studied either. So.
And the other thing is that you're performing at such a high level, not just physically, but as a lawyer. You've not only, through all of this, which I just find incredible, you've managed to sort of, top of your class at WashU, is that what you did?
WashU, yeah.
WashU, and then you did your
law school at University of Washington, so I've confused a lot of people. Yes.
You did UW, which is two of the most beautiful campus in the world, UW.
Yeah.
And so you're it's like, and I've talked to a lot of other women, elite women athletes. They're like, the things that make them good at running make them, they're organized. They're really clear thinking, organized, brilliant sort of minds that also create this body that's able to overcome pain and all the things that come with running and performing it. I mean, God knows what you're doing in Spartan and all the other all the obstacle course racing. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they go hand in hand, and I think that there's this ability to push past that pain, and you just think that it's normal, but then all of a sudden, like, it's hard to know what is the good kind of pain and then what is the bad type of pain where you are harming your body for the rest of your life type of pain. And that is something that we ride that razor edge as, an elite athlete, and you don't know sometimes.
And I think that's the biggest chance. I've talked to runners that are about to run the 5K or the mile. And it's like, at some point, doesn't your mind say, you're about to put my body through enormous pain and suffering? It could lead to a panic attack or anxiety. I mean, some runners have said they had an anxiety attack in the middle of the race and couldn't continue, and other things. Has that been a part of your experience? Or are you able, you've got such a strong mental sort of magnet, you can overcome that?
Yeah, I think the thing that draws me to long endurance events. So I specialize now in 24-hour events, in 100-mile races, in things that are just very, very long. And the physical part will only take you so far, but then it's the mental part where that's really going to carry you through to the end. And there is something about that weird combination, that the same thing that enables me to get through a 100-mile race is unfortunately the same thing that enabled me to starve myself for so many years, because it's just that kind of that just determination and grit. And then also, I don't know, it's hard because it seems like very similar traits, and one can be used for good things and one can be used for bad things. But I can't separate them sometimes, so.
Hey, well, so I mean, obviously you're so good. It's like, why do you do it? What is it that's driving you to,
As an athlete?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love it. There is nothing better to me than like the wee hours at night running through the woods with a headlamp, and it is the time when I feel so alive, when I feel like everything in the world makes sense. And it's just an utter love of now being able to do it. And especially now, the thing that keeps me at this point continuing on. Look, I'm 38. Probably my best athletic career days are behind me in terms of like absolute performance. But now I'm at a point where I'm healthier. I'm able to do these races without breaking bones. And now it comes from a place of gratitude, that I'm able to race because my body is functioning. I'm taking care of it. And I can do this for the rest of my life, instead of like riding that edge where it's like, I need to be peak performance now. Who cares if I can walk in 20 years? But like at that point, earlier on when I was younger, it was all about just focusing on the here and now and that performance in that moment and not thinking of myself as a lifelong athlete.
I wonder in this day and age with nutrition and exercise and the science has enabled now, you've had to overcome insurmountable, pressure psychologically. But like Tom Brady, you're actually getting better as you've gotten. I mean, you're still, when you show up, people are going, "Oh shit." Yeah. Right? I mean, I've done so many shows like they're still going, "Oh wait, hang on a second."
Right.
You're the one that they're still looking. Wait, where.
And to me, it's also a challenge. Like I want to be, I want to be competing. I want to be competitive and winning well into my 40s, and and like that to me is now a challenge. Like how far can I go? How long can I be an athlete? And I think we lose so much sight of that when we're younger too. Because we think, okay, like we have this short span in our 20s, maybe when we are the best athletes that we can be, and then it's all downhill from there. But now that I'm well past that, I'm like, no, I can still go as long as I take care of my body. And that's the hard part, I think.
Well, I think that's, you're proving the misconception. It's like, to me, it's like, I know my sisters were, when they ran in high school, it's like, to run fast, you had to run thin.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that affected you in your thinking, but that was like, well, if you want to run faster, lose 3 pounds, and you're not carrying as much weight. It's like, that seems like, the grade school version of not knowing.
Right.
And then I think also the other side of that is you're going to peak as an athlete at 23 and a half.
Right.
And so both of those sort of preconceptions have been tossed out the window.
Yeah.
You're seeing every sport, not just men's and women's, where you're seeing Serena Williams having her best years at the high,
Right.
She's still out there kicking ass, as for health, to your point, for health, she's still going to win.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think there is definitely, the culture is changing in the running community, but there still is that theory and, that the thinner you are, the faster you'll run. And that's also a reason that I realize I am susceptible to that pressure. And so I don't run road races. I don't do that kind of, where it would be more, that correlation seems to still be there. The obstacle races require a lot of strength. They require me to do a lot of like upper body work. Ultra running, it doesn't, your body type over 100 miles is not, actually, we like to say you need to be sturdier. We call it trail padding. So I know myself, and I gravitate more towards races that are not so fixated on weight and body size, because I know that going down that rabbit hole would be very bad for me psychologically.
So the other thing that the added pressure that women must face, that men, maybe they do, maybe they don't, is that image. Women are so judged by their appearance.
Yeah.
And by how they look, and whether, it's like in tennis, I think was one of the most severe. They're so brutal about, she looks, all the, it's like, how has that experience for you been as far as, being judged by your appearance? And that's really the brutal, awful side of things.
Yeah. I was not aware how judged women were about their appearance until it happened to me. So it was 2015. I had just won the Spartan Race National Series Championship, and there was a photo of me during the race, and I was crossing the finish line. I was jumping up in the air. I was super happy, and the picture was taken from a weird angle, and some guy commented on the photo. He goes, "Your body is weird, and it's thick." And it devastated me. It was just some random commenter on the internet. And instead of focusing on how great it was that I just won this national series championship, all I could fixate on was the fact that some guy told me my body was weird. And I then for the next several races, in obstacle racing, we normally, because you're covered in mud, so you normally race in like little short shorts and a sports bra. For the next few races, I covered up as much as possible because I didn't want people to comment on my body. And this was actually when things started to get really bad with my eating disorder again and spiral. So as much as I'd like to say that, oh, I don't care what people say or what people think about me, it definitely, the fact that I can still remember that means that it's out there. And that wasn't the only occurrence. There are several others. And I don't know what gives people the right to comment on other people's bodies. And the fact that we as women have to deal with it so much more than men. And I absolutely contributes to, the eating disorders in the sports world. I'd be lying if I thought that they were separate things.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the evils of social media. It's like every drink in the bar has a microphone.
Exactly. Yeah, like somebody give the yeah. Sorry.
and then the other side, I think, for women also is I just interviewed a really talented young woman in Portland. She had someone who obsessed over her because he was obsessed with her. She was the women. There are a lot. The physique, the body is beautiful. We're celebrating the image of women. I think it probably started with Linda Hamilton and Terminator 2.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody saw Linda Hamilton. It was like, what's the ideal woman? It went from Sophia Loren to Twiggy to Linda Hamilton. All of a sudden we see, wow, look how amazing she looks. And like everybody rushes, all of a sudden women are in the gyms and Jane Fonda and all the fitness craze, and then suddenly, what the ideal woman has become has changed as well.
And I think, unfortunately, we do such a disservice because sports are all about how your body should be functional. Like your body needs to perform, and that doesn't have a look. Everybody's genetics are different. I am never, even when I starved myself to the most, the lightest weight that I was ever at and was incredibly sick, I never had a six-pack. I am never going to physiologically have a six-pack probably because genetically it's just not there for me. But we have these images of if you're an athlete, this is what you should look like. And unfortunately, instead of being if you're an athlete, who cares what your body looks like as long as it's functioning and doing and competing and doing what it's supposed to do. And that is what's so messed up is that people expect athletes to also look like the models in the magazine, which shouldn't be the case.
Well, exactly. And now, and unfortunately, to make it, to ride, that's kind of what we celebrate. I think even today the culture has shifted away from, what used to be Cary Grant and and Audrey Hepburn to Serena Williams or to Naomi Osaka, or who the athletes have now become the image. That image has really become what people, and now actors are having to work out to sort of get an athlete's body, if that makes sense.
Some of the worst things for me, honestly, were I've been on another number of covers of magazines, and preparing for those photo shoots were the most nerve-wracking things for me ever because I knew my body was going to be on display on the cover of a magazine. And though nobody ever asked me to starve myself or dehydrate myself for those covers, I just thought, okay, that's what I have to do because I've grown up in this culture where I'm inundated with covers, with magazine covers of extremely toned and, thin women. And I was like, I need to also be that. And as an athlete, that's also a horrible thing to do to yourself while you're also in training and then preparing for a and so, it's not good.
And of course, marketing has helped. The image of women has been, it's well, come back in and we'll retouch here.
Oh my God,
Nip tuck here. We'll take a little mole off of here, and we'll do all these things. And suddenly, this unattainable idyllic image is that's what I need to look like. And young
Yeah.
15-year-old girls say, I need to look like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they become depressed. Or it goes into a cycle of, I can't ever reach that level of perfection.
Well, and I felt extremely guilty because here I was on the cover of these magazines in a full-blown eating disorder, and people were aspiring to have my body, but I knew what I was doing to myself to look that way. And there was a big sense of guilt that I had that went with that, is that I've put myself out to be this kind of beacon of health as like a world-class athlete, yet every day I am destroying my health, and you shouldn't want to look like this. I remember one time I was actually in the sauna at a gym, and a woman came up to me and she's like, you look so good. What's your secret? And I turned to her and I go, I have an eating disorder. She was super awkward from that, but it's the truth. And we don't talk about that enough. It's not just, good diet and exercise. So.
Is your family, were you all really good athletes? Did you, because you've got great genetics, obviously, but what, was there a big athletic competitive thing that was there a lot of competition in your home growing up that drove you to become this incredibly successful competitive athlete?
It's funny. My family, we were all active, and my parents played tennis and my sister played golf, but it wasn't ever, there was no external pressure on me. I think my parents from a very early age recognized that I put a lot of internal pressure on myself, that I had a lot of just internal motivation, and they actually tried to pull me back and be like, it's okay, you don't have to play 4 sports. It's okay, we don't care if you win the race. It's okay, you can get a B on a test and we're not gonna disown you. So I almost sometimes wish that I had somebody to blame, be like, well, so-and-so forced me and everybody told me that I need to do this, but I don't know why I ended up this way. It was just it seemed to be very internal for me.
Well, and I think it's probably elite athletes like yourself, and Michael Jordan is one that, he needed to find, a target. He needed to, he had this sense that people were, dissing him, or he had a challenge. I have to have a challenge, and it inspired his greatness.
Right.
So your challenge is you just love to compete and win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I've always kind of looked for, I love the idea of mastery, and so I love the idea of finding something that interests me, being really bad at it, and then seeing how I can improve and how far I can get, and can I get to the top of something? And then once I'm there, I'm like, okay, what's my next challenge?
So I think that's probably a high level. I don't know your. If you've anyone done an IQ test on you, it sounds like you're breaking the Mensa charts on the net as well. Because I know to be able to function at all these different levels, you have to really be really able to to overcome that and not destroy yourself mentally.
Right. Well, and I think sometimes too, also having multiple things going on keeps me from fixating on one thing too much, and so. I can tend to get in my head if all I had was sports, then I think that I would actually it would be too much and I would mentally destroy myself obsessing over that. And so I like to keep the balance there.
What could you tell young women that, potentially talented, women like yourself, how could you help them avoid some of the mistakes you've made?
Yeah.
Or not, I won't say mistakes, but just avoid some of the challenges that have created problems for you physically and mentally.
The biggest thing that I would say is that if you're struggling with food, if you think that you have disordered eating disorder, get help sooner rather than later. It is much easier to battle through and to go into recovery if you've only had an eating disorder for a year or two versus 20, 30 years. I have found 20 years into this, it is very, very hard to break habits that have been with me for more of my life than not. And if you can really own up and get help early, it is much, much easier to overcome. It's not saying it's going to be easier. It's going to be easy, but you give yourself a better chance. And in that same vein, you can build bone until you're like early 30s. So if you go into recovery in your early 20s and you have osteoporosis and you think you're done, you can reverse all of that. Once you hit a certain age, like you can't do that anymore. And so I hate to be kind of like the cautionary tale, but I had heard these things when I was younger. I didn't really believe them. There wasn't as much information out there as there is now. So I think we didn't really know, but then I also kind of just shoved it in the back of my mind. And then I hit this spot, when I hit my 30s, and I was like, oh, like this is with me for the rest of my life. And I kind of wish that I had taken it more seriously earlier on. At the same time, you can only recover for yourself. Parents and coaches can push you into it. It was actually my soccer coach, my sophomore year of high school, who was the one who first noticed that I had an issue and talked to my parents about it. And so I was kicking and screaming going into treatment. I didn't want to do it. I recovered for everyone else but me. I put on a show for everyone around me when I was in high school and college because I just wanted them to leave me alone. It's not going to stick until you have motivation within yourself to actually address the problem. And it took me way too long to get there. But I think that, when you find that one thing that you want to recover for me, it was to be able to still be an athlete. And that actually stuck for me.
Wow, that's really inspirational. I mean, that's because that really is, and then I think I've heard other athletes that say, I've outsmarted the coaches.
Right.
I outsmarted. They said, oh, you're not eating enough. Like, oh, yes, I am. I'm doing this. I'm doing that.
Yep.
And then, or you're not, because it's competitive, you're trying to lower your score.
Right.
You're running against time.
Right.
You're running against a number. And those sports will say, well, if I work out harder, I do a little more training, I can lower your
time. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think especially when it comes to eating disorders, like people with eating disorders tend to be masters of manipulation, and there's a lot of lying that goes on to protect the eating disorder. And that's how it is. I don't think anybody wants to lie, but the reason that we lie and manipulate coaches and parents and teachers and sponsors is because we want to protect that. And for me, I found to stop protecting the eating disorder, I need to talk about it and I need to put it out there and I need to be open with it. So I'm not protecting it anymore. And then I don't want to lie about it.
Wow. How did you find Opal?
I actually, honestly, there was an article in Runner's World about a professional runner for Brooks named Hannah Fields who went into treatment at Opal. And at that point, I realized that I needed help, but I was terrified that somebody was going to tell me I could no longer run. And I found that Opal would work with athletes and say, you don't have to give up your sport. You just have to understand your relationship with it. And your sport could be healthy for you. It could not be healthy for you, but it's learning how to figure out what that intrinsic motivation is. Why do you run? And that, I think, to me was like the reason I went there, to figure out like what was my relationship with it and could I continue to do this.
And I also think it helped that Kara was a D1 runner at UW. She'd been with a whole team of disordered athletes that she worked with. She lost her cycle. I mean, that's the kind of help and success